In a previous program, we discussed with Professor Tandon from Delhi University the global scenario regarding the period of the Earth's history when the dinosaurs ruled the Earth's surface. We discussed what the general theories about dinosaurs are, particularly with regards their extinction at a period of time technically known as the Cretaceous Tertiary boundary. Today we shall be knowing more from Professor Tandon what we have in the Indian subcontinent in terms of the geological record of dinosaurs and their period of extinction. Professor Tandon incidentally is one of the most renowned earth scientists from this country, a member of several national and international scientific organizations. He is currently a professor of geology in the Delhi University, and to his credit, besides several other awards, is perhaps the most prestigious Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award. Professor Tandon, briefly can you just give us an idea of where the dinosaurian remains have been discovered from the Indian subcontinent?
There are lots of sections, and let us look at some field slides actually. So, now we are looking at a field slide of a very important site in the Jabalpur area actually.
Okay.
Now, in this area, this is very close to the Jabalpur railway station actually. It is about half a kilometer from there, and this is a very well known quarry, because it is being the upper Gondwana fire clays are being quarried over there for a very long time. And what one sees here is an Intertwapian section, or which is also referred to as the lemata beds.
Okay.
And if we have the next slide now, in which you can see there are several sections where you do not have a quarry, but a natural situation here where we have a river actually, and the river Narmada actually, again about 14 kilometers southwest of the Jabalpur city, actually the railway station. And you have also here the lemata beds and the local, what is locally the basal flow occurring over here. So, you can see the contact here between the basal flow in this section and the uppermost part of the lemata beds.
So, in the foreground you have the lemmatas, and in the background the dark portion is the basalt.
The traps. The lemmatas of course here have dinosaurian materials, basically dinosaur eggshells and egg fragments.
I see. So, I mean if one were to, this is basically the Intertwapian situation.
We can also look at another slide which will show you an Intertwapian section, and here, although this slide is not that good, but nevertheless you can see that there is a weathered basalt beneath, and then there is a light colored strata which are actually the Intertwapian limestones, and then these Intertwapian limestones are brachiated, and then you can see an overlying flow. So, here it is sandwiched, the limestone is sandwiched between two flows actually, that is called Intertwapian.
I see. And both these infra and Intertwapian, as you are saying, contain dinosaurian remains?
Yes, that is a very interesting point that you have raised, Vivek, because there was always a thought that as soon as large volumes of volcanism started, that means the initiation of volcanism was a period when the dinosaur extinction took place. Now, I think that is not quite true, because it is being increasingly shown that the infra and Intertwapian strata are paleontologically actually indistinguishable on many scores.
I see.
But as far as the dinosaur story is concerned, there is dinosaurian material, dinosaur eggshells for instance in a locality in Kutch called Anjar, where you have flows, Intertwapian flow, Intertwapian flow, Intertwapian.
I see.
And it is in one of the higher Intertwapian levels, relatively higher Intertwapian levels in Anjar, the third or the fourth, the third Intertwapian level there, that you have dinosaur materials and the iridium anomaly also.
Oh, so I mean you have basically this dinosaur fossils which are telling us by their presence in the infra as well as Intertwapian that the eruption of the volcanism of Deccan traps is not really the end of the era of dinosaurs. They have continued slightly more.
They have probably, it is not that the first flow or the first volcanic activity did not make it go extinct. They probably straggled, there were stragglers, and although there might have been an intense pressure on them for survival, but it is clear from the record that they did survive the first initial volcanism and probably became extinct as they could not cope up with the changing conditions on earth as the volcanism proceeded. Now, what might be very interesting actually is because we do not know here, the Deccan is a very special situation, because now we have an iridium anomaly also, and if the iridium anomaly is because of a bolide impact, then there is this idea where you try to marry both the ideas, that you see the impact was an accident when accelerated volcanism was already taking place on Earth. So, accelerated volcanism has created a great environmental crisis, add to that an impact, and there is total disaster. So, that is the time perhaps when the dinosaurs really got hit and went extinct.
I see. But I mean the pictures that we have been seen so far in terms of whether the infra or intertrapians, basically I mean they are beds, how thick are they?
Oh, they are not very thick beds. In a lot of cases there is a lot of variation basically. The infratrapian, the maximum thickness of the lemata beds is usually of the order of about 50 meters or so, that would be about at its maximum. But in many cases in central India what is left is very little. So, you might have only half a meter of lemata.
No, because why I asked you is that we have been talking about dinosaurian fossils being present in infra and intertrapians. The dinosaurs, the normal concept is they are huge animals, and how do you get those fossils in these? Or do we have only fragmentary record?
You do have fragmentary records. You also have complete skeletons actually. But I think we must remember that all dinosaurs were, you can have very small dinosaurs, you can have dinosaurs as small as a chicken also. And you can also have dinosaurs which are very large actually, huge dinosaurs are there. But the ones that were there, can we have a look at the next diagram, and we will see some fossils actually. So, this is basically fragmentary material of dinosaurs. You can see that there is a hammer there for scale. So, we are just looking at about couple of meters across.
But I mean this is not a full skeleton, this is just a part of the.
This is not a full skeleton actually, this is not, but it is not the thickness which matters here. What matters is the three dimensionality. Right. So, if you have the width of an outcrop is large enough, and the third dimension is large enough.
So I mean the animal after dying would tend to fall down and the whole thing getting.
So, the thickness is not of any great consequence.
I see. And then besides these bones, anything else that we come across in these inter and intratrapians?
I think what has happened in the last decade or a decade and a half is one of the very exciting things that happened in central India, elsewhere also, is the find of dinosaur nesting sites, eggshells, dinosaur eggs. And if you look at the following slide, what you see in this diagram is again the Narmada river, because that is purely coincidental to this, because that is where you have the maximum depth to erosion, modern erosion basically. And you see several localities there, and these localities are extending all the way from Jabalpur, which is an important dinosaur nesting locality, to an infratrapian site as far as Anjar, which we are talking on a scale of several hundred kilometers. And you have very many important dinosaur nesting sites. Most important of these which have been well studied are in Gujarat actually, places like Kheda and Balasinor, where they were initially recognized and collected from. So, it is a fairly extensive area. There are different.
Sorry, but just as an explanation, you have been talking about nesting sites. What is a nesting site? I mean, how do you recognize a nesting site?
A nesting site is a place where the female dinosaur has laid the eggs actually. And usually you can have an egg clutch, because it is not a single egg that is laid. You can have a
I mean most reptiles tend to do that.
A group of eggs actually. So, if we look at the next slide, we can see now the types of dinosaurs that are there. And in these types of dinosaurs, the main type of dinosaur that was there in central India, particularly in the Cretaceous, were the sauropods. And these are herbivorous forms, which mainly are plant eaters, and the species is Titanosaurus. There were other forms also. There were ankylosaurids, and there were also theropods, and there is also the famous Tyrannosaurus also, which is there. But they are largely a community of sauropods. And the eggshells are or the eggs are largely referred to the sauropods. Most of the eggs are of the sauropod type. And in the next diagram, what we see is a fragmented eggshell. You see, it is highly fragmented, and it occurs in a brachiated Palestrine limestone.
Yeah.
Palestrine limestone is one in which is a limestone which is precipitated in a very shallow body of water.
I see.
Now, if you look at the next slide, which is from actually the main collecting locality, that is Kheda and Balasinor in Gujarat, that is an egg clutch.
Okay.
Now, this nesting site or an egg clutch has got several individual rounded forms. There is a scale there which shows that these are from about 14 to 20 centimeters. The diameter.
Yeah.
The egg shells actually can be divided into different types.
Yeah.
And we can have different types. The basis for that is to cut a radial thin section. If you take an egg,
yeah,
then you cut a radial thin section and look at the structure, the internal structure of the shell.
Okay.
And then in a diagram that we have, we can show that there is the internal structure consists of several spherulets.
Yeah.
And the size of the spherulets and the uniformity of the spherulets and the pattern of the spherulets and the growth lines on the spherulets actually lead us to classify them into different types. And from this region we have got about 5 different types, the predominant ones being referable to the titanosaurids.
Okay. I mean, now we have been talking about nesting sites. One would, if we look at present day reptilian modes, there is a lot of similarity, that there is a clutch of eggs which is present. But in terms of these large reptiles, they would lay their eggs not randomly, but in certain specific sites, and then in the vicinity of the eggs you would expect some embryonic or smaller child forms of the dinosaurs. Are there any such records from India?
That is a very interesting point that you have raised. Elsewhere in the world, Horner's name is a big name from the US in dinosaur studies, and they have recognized embryonic materials in their studies, and they also have juvenile forms usually when nesting sites are available, which is a very logical thing to flow from actually and to expect. But unfortunately, I do not think we have any embryonic material reported thus far from our region. And we also do not have any, well, there are some unconfirmed reports of juveniles, but really not something which is very well established. Now, that really poses a problem as to the environments are very hostile. The organisms are living and laying eggs. But what happens to the next logical stage? And there seems to be a missing link there in our record, whether it is because of inadequate studies or whether there is a hidden scientific fact there, I do not know.
I see. I mean, would you think of linking that with the sort of environmental crisis that we are talking about, that the volcanism had started and then the eggs never hatched perhaps?
There is this problem. I have been asked this before and I have never been able, I can see that the environments are very hostile, basically the ones in which we find the egg material. I think I really do not understand at this point of time what is happening in terms of the missing link, in terms of juveniles and in terms of embryonic materials. But what you have raised is a very interesting point, is about the strata itself, and that is where I come in actually. I mean, thus far I was speaking about things which I should not be speaking about. But yes, the strata holds very important clues with respect to the type of environments that we are talking about. And when we look at the next diagram, what we tend to see, and that is, I think I have taken a lot of personal interest there in trying to, what we have done so far is we have looked at Deccan volcanism, we have looked at sauropod nesting sites, and now I think is the time to look basically at the stratal record, the record in which this material occurs. Because these studies are very complementary, you can't look at just the eggs or just the volcanism. So there is a holistic approach which you follow in this. So we have looked at the sedimentary facies, we have looked at the petrology, we have looked also at the carbon and oxygen isotopic composition of the host sediments in which the eggs occur and that of the eggs as well. And that takes us to several interesting points about the paleo environments in which this material is found.
You've mentioned basically a few technical terms, if I may. You said facies. What is, I mean, to a common man, how are they just plain simple different rock types?
Well, not really, because then I would have used the word lithology.
Yeah.
I use the word facies basically to say that there is a homogeneous set of properties of the sediment in which it occurs.
So, I mean basically we are first looking at sediments and
sediments,
then trying to subdivide them into different types.
facies depending upon the homogeneity characteristics. So, if a part of a sediment package is homogeneous with respect to certain properties, I would identify that as a facies.
So, in the say type section of Jabalpur, which we have been mentioning quite often, is there any particular sequence that we find as a specific say facies or lithological association or sequence succession?
Yes, let us look at it in terms of the slides actually. Now, there is a very interesting assemblage of facies now that we have defined facies.
Yeah.
The sequences themselves have got a green sand at the base,
Yeah.
and then this is overlain by a calcareous lithofacies.
Yeah.
This calcareous lithofacies consists both of ancient soils, ancient calcareous soils, and very, very shallow lake sediments, and then also of sheet wash sediments. So, there are sheets, thin sheets of water which just moves around sediment. So, you have got sheet wash sediments.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing in this slide is the fact that we are not only showing the sauropod nests, but you can also see that there are other organic life there. You have got molluscan life, you have got gastropods, you have got ostracods.
So, effectively I mean it is not just the dinosaurs which are preserved, there is a lot of other fossils.
There are other organisms also, because there is always a food chain basically. So, if you have an arboriferous form, you need plants basically. So, you have got Chara there, and then of course, from the pollen evidence which is not mentioned in this diagram, we know that there is a suite of plants there.
I see, which coexisted with
the dinosaur, which was their food actually in the case of the herbivorous forms.
I see. And then when looking at the host sediments basically, is there any specific evidence or characteristic in the sediments which says that okay, there is something different which had happened, some hostility had entered into the entire system?
Can we look at the next diagram? When we look at the next diagram, we are showing you a distribution of it is a map, it is a geological map, it is a sketch geological map which shows the distribution of the different units, stratigraphic units of the lemmatas. It shows you the green sand, it shows you the lower limestone, the motonodular beds, and the upper calcified sandstone, and then the overlying flow. Now, each one of these units has got a different depositional environment.
Yes.
So, can I have the next slide where we can see these units in their vertical context? We had earlier seen it in a spatial context, now we are seeing it in a vertical context. And we see that these lemmata beds, the main unit in which the dinosaur eggshell material is there is this limestone actually. And we can also see in this that we have got dinosaur bone material. There are articulated skeletons also, nearly articulated. And so, you have got the coexistence of articulated skeletal materials, Titanosaurus and Tyrannosaurus, and dinosaur eggshell material in the lower limestone. So, it is important to perhaps look at the lower limestone, the characters of the lower limestone. Can we look at the next diagram? We can see the main light colored band, a couple of meters in thickness, which is the lower limestone. And it has got different characters. Can we have the next slide please? And in this, what we see, and a very important attribute that we see is a lot of brachiation, a lot of breakage has taken place. And this breakage we attribute to mainly to physical shrinkage.
I see. I mean something similar to what you would see in a say pond base which has dried up, and then you get those cracks all around. Or
precisely. So, there are volume changes taking place in the sediment because it goes through saturation and then it goes through a period of drying out actually. So, there are intense periods of drying out which were taking place. So, drying out of water bodies and physical shrinkage in adjacent soil systems seem to be a very major attribute of all of these rocks in which the dinosaurian material is found.
So, I mean this more or less links up with the fact that from a greenhouse system where you had intense foliage, a lot of wetness, and then you are coming into a system which perhaps was drier and things were getting dried up. Is that what is being indicated?
There are, it is very clear that there are very intense periods. I do not know, it is very difficult, you see, to when you are looking at geological materials, time resolution is not very good.
Sure.
So, you cannot speak in terms of days, months, years and so on, but it is very clear that there are very strong periods when, but there are periods when there is very strong desiccating conditions are taking place. So, that there is an intense pressure in terms of moisture deficit on the organic communities there.
Yeah. And then I mean, you said that many of the dinosaurs which were existing were herbivores. I mean, okay, they are known to be herbivores, but is there any record of plant life or some such fossils which tell us that it was there?
Yes, there is a good study. Can we have the next slides, please? If you look at the rocks themselves, these many of the rocks do have a record of both pollen. Pollen have been extracted, and they have long names, so I won't be able to give you the names. But also simultaneously within the rocks, within the carbonate rocks, we do get evidence of plant activity in terms of root-like structures.
I see.
In these slides, what one sees basically is that there are periods when sediments have moved. You see pebbles coming into it, right? So there is water, and when water is available, then perhaps the processes of rooting also are taking place, and consequently we have fabrics, microscopic fabrics, and also field morphologies which resemble root-like features.
So, all these features basically are telling us that a lot of changes probably were taking place. You have soil forming events, you have flood events, if I may use the word, when these pebbles are coming in and so on. And then taking all this into account, we have the volcanism which sits on top of it and which probably contributed to the overall environmental crisis. Is there any sort of geochemical record which would tell us that yes, there was a drastic change in the, say, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere which is preserved in the rock record or something similar?
See, one very interesting thing about these rocks is that some of these we are interpreting as ancient soil carbonates.
Right.
And when you look at ancient soil carbonates in the last decade or so, it has been shown that ancient soil carbonates can be used as proxy indicators of the carbon dioxide concentration of ancient atmospheres. Now, what one would like to have in terms of data would be essentially the carbonate itself, and since carbonate is CaCO3, you can make it react with orthophosphoric acid, and then you can generate CO2 gas. And then you can determine the C12-C13 ratio, the stable isotope ratio of carbon and oxygen both actually. Now, you can use the C12-C13 ratio basically as a proxy indicator of the carbon dioxide concentration. And when one does that from the soil carbonates, we see that the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is at least 3 to 5 times more than what it is now. And it is possible also to test this stratigraphic value, if you permit me to call that so, with what are the modeled values. So, there are modeled values of carbon dioxide variations of atmospheres through geological time actually. And if you look at this diagram, you can see that there is a diagram which Berner has proposed through for the last 600 million years through Phanerozoic time, and the y-axis gives you the variations with respect to the modern values. And you see that in the Paleozoic, there are very large uncertainties in the modeled values. So, it is very important therefore to get stratigraphic verifications. And you see that in the Paleozoic era, you have got much larger values. And then in the early Cretaceous also you had values as large as 2500 to 3000 ppmv, parts per million per unit volume of atmosphere. But if we look at our values, they are of the order of 1000 to 1300 ppmv. Now, which shows that there is certainly a drop from the early Cretaceous levels. And it is probably premature to say because it is only from one site, but I think we should be carrying out such studies at several intertrapian levels to see what happens to carbon dioxide concentrations in atmospheres when accelerated volcanism is taking place. So, that is a very interesting line of approach which can be followed.
Right. Just briefly to sum up, if I were to try to put it in a concise form, we have a record of dinosaurs, not a very rich perhaps record, but a very strong and definite record surely in India, which refers to the period when perhaps the dinosaurs were just about to become extinct, and in that sense it is very critical. One thing I think we also must appreciate, that we are looking at a fragmentary record and trying to extract information from that and try to understand what was happening in the past. I am sure our viewers would be excited by the type of work that Professor Tandon has been leading and initiating in different parts of the country. Thank you, Professor Tandon, for being with us. I can only hope that this excites more interest in this very fascinating subject of geology. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vivek.